Hello, I am Dr. Beard, and this is my lecture on what I call the magic formula, how to write essays for college that will make your professors happy, because that's what you want to do when you're writing for college professors. You want them to be happy. So I call this the magic formula, because it is a formula for those of you that are more math-minded or more formulaic in your thinking. There is a formula that you can use to write effective papers. And I call this the magic formula, but you have probably heard of it before as the 5-paragraph essay. So I'll start off by saying, as a professor of rhetoric, writing professor, I took a lot of courses about effective ways to teach writing, and particularly first year writing courses. The first college course that you take in English has to do with rhetoric and composition, writing essays. And through the years, there's been some debate about the 5-paragraph essay. And there are scholars and thinkers out there that teach writing who think, oh, we need to get away from the 5-paragraph essay. It's too elementary. College students should be doing something different. They should be doing more than 5-paragraph essays. They learned that in elementary school. They learned that in high school. So in college, they need to do something else. They need to do something more advanced, something more collegiate. And I don't disagree that, of course, 5-paragraph essays are pretty basic. They teach 5-paragraph essays as early as 3rd grade, 4th grade. Maybe you heard of the 5-paragraph essay in middle school, or maybe you were taught this method in high school. So it is simplistic, and most college essays are going to require more than 5 paragraphs. That seems more than obvious. But what is important to realize is that if you don't have this tool in your toolbox for writing, if you don't have a basic understanding of a 5-paragraph essay format, it's going to be hard for you to jump to the next level. I will say from personal experience, having gone through college all the way to the top. I mean, I have 4 degrees, so I always joke that I won at college. I got all the prizes. I have 4 degrees in English, so of course I wrote many, many papers in my college experience, and I consider myself a good writer, very competent, and I made good grades on my essays. I can only think of maybe 1 or 2 essays in my entire academic career that I made less than an A on. Not to be a braggart about it. I just know what I'm good at, and it's important for you to know what you're good at as well, so you can shine and excel in the areas that you are naturally talented in. So I wasn't a very good mathematician. It took me a couple times to get through college algebra, but I could write an essay for pretty much any course and do well. And I was taught the 5-paragraph essay method back in elementary school. And I literally used the 5-paragraph essay method for pretty much every paper that I wrote in college. But the difference in, writing an elementary level paper and writing at a higher level, an academic level, at the level of scholarship, at master's level, graduate class level, the difference is that you take this strategy and you expand upon it. So that's why I have here that the magic formula is the 5-paragraph essay evolved. because it's more than a 5-paragraph essay, but it is a formula that starts with the 5 paragraphs. I've heard this a lot in school that, you can't break the rules until you know what the rules are. Once you are familiar with the rules and you have them down, then you can be creative and break the rules. That's particularly true if you think about like with creative writing. Sometimes in creative writing, you don't always follow strict grammar rules, right? You can have dialogue, you can have fragmented thinking in a creative writing environment. But most professors, most English teachers will say, you need to know the basic grammar rules. You need to know the rules. Once you know the rules, you can break them. And this is the case with the 5-paragraph essay. If you don't have this basic structure in your toolkit and you don't understand the basics of this structure, you're going to find it to be more difficult when you sit down to write a longer essay. So I think this does work very well. I think it's worthwhile for anyone who has to do any kind of academic writing in particular, because we're really thinking about academic writing, but this could work for other types of writing as well. But we really are focusing on, writing those academic essays for all of our courses, especially as you get to upper level courses, your major courses, you're going to have to write essays. And the reason that you have to write essays is not because your professors want to torture you and go through the process of making you do something that you find difficult and that you don't want to do. Writing is just a way of thinking about a topic. Okay, we can provide research, analysis, but especially for the undergraduates, writing is assigned in our coursework because we want you to think about the course material. We want you to interact with the reading assignments. We want you to look at the articles and the research that makes up the course and process that in your own mind and think about it. And writing is a form of thinking. That's why it's good to write and then revise and work through the first draft and even the second draft and the third draft sometimes. Sometimes a piece of writing is never really complete. You have to, at some point, be finished with it. But, often I will go back to something I've written and it will seem like the final draft, but I will find ways to adjust because the first time you're just thinking about the subject matter, processing that information, and writing is a way to process how you think about something. And that's why you're asked to produce essays in college. We don't keep all of the essays that students write and have them on the shelf for posterity. Not necessarily. You will have publications if you're a graduate student. Graduate students publish articles that are used in research. But, as an undergrad, your essays really are intended to be a tool for you to think about the subject matter. That is why we assign writing in our courses. And you will have writing assignments in all kinds of courses, not just English classes, history classes, psychology, political science, even science courses require writing. So writing is a method that we use to get students to think about the subject matter that they are studying. And you are a scholar when you are in a college setting, when you are attending courses at this level, you should consider yourself a scholar. You're not just an elementary student anymore or a high school student. You're not in the 13th grade or the 14th grade. You are now entering the realm of scholarship, of academic pursuit. And you should think of yourself as a scholar as you go through your college experience, your academic program. You will be adding to the knowledge of your subject that you're studying, more so even as you progress through a major and become an expert in whatever you're studying. So this is how to write your papers. Usually people are quick to respond with the 5-paragraph essay. You know what it is. It's an introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. That is the basic premise of a 5-paragraph essay. Everyone knows that. But there are a lot of misconceptions, and people are taught things differently based on, your teacher, your school that you go to. So people will be told, or they will think, that the thesis needs to be the first sentence of your introduction. That is false. You do not need a thesis in the first sentence. In fact, it's not very effective as your first sentence. Or people will say things like, oh, your thesis has to be the last sentence of your introduction. And that's not true either. In most cases, there's not a rule that always applies across the board. I hate to say something is always the case in a writing situation or in most situations. There's always exceptions to rules, but there are some rules that you have to follow in the academic realm. But having your thesis as your first sentence is not one of them, or having it as your last sentence is not one of them. But typically people know the general structure of a 5-paragraph essay. Introduction, main body paragraph 1, main body paragraph 2, main body paragraph 3, and a conclusion. So we're going to go beyond this basic 5-paragraph structure. Now, some of your assignments are going to only require 5 paragraphs. I mean, why work harder when you can work smarter? One thing I want to really reiterate, and I don't think people take this very seriously as they should, is giving the professor what they want, giving the professor what they are looking for. So really diving into the assignment. Your professors should give you writing assignments that are pretty detailed. They will tell you how long the essay needs to be, the subject matter generally, maybe even there will be a prompt or a specific topic that you have to address. There's usually a few details in a writing assignment for a college level course. You want to make sure that you're meeting the requirements set forth by your professors. So, what questions need to be answered? What is the information that needs to be included? What is the subject matter that you have to look at specifically? So, I will use an example of a literature course. If you're reading literature for a course, that reading will be listed on the syllabus. There will be some sort of guide for you that provides all of the reading assignments for that course. In the case of a literature class, maybe you're reading the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer, or the Aeneid by Virgil. Maybe you're reading excerpts from the Canterbury Tales by Chaucer. So you have assigned reading. Your professors want that reading to come up in your essays. You do not want to write an essay in a literature course about literature that was not read in the course. I will say, as a professor, generally we would think if you turn in a paper that's written about other reading assignments that are not assigned reading, you're writing about things that are not even listed on the course. It's unlikely that you're reading the course content. It's not unlikely that you're engaging with the reading materials, and you're going to just go out and read something else. I'll give an example. Nathaniel Hawthorne, writing during the Transcendentalist time, American author, novelist. He wrote The Scarlet Letter. Most people are familiar with that novel. in some form or fashion. Maybe you've read the novel, but in a world literature class, maybe the assigned reading is Young Goodman Brown, also by Nathaniel Hawthorne, but it is a short story because the class is not going to go into depth into a longer novel. It's just a course to get us familiar with the work of Nathaniel Hawthorne, and a great way to do that is to read his short story, Young Goodman Brown. If I receive a paper about the Scarlet Letter and there's not one mention of Young Goodman Brown, even though that was the assigned reading, I'm going to be irritated because I'm not going to think the student went and read the Scarlet Letter. What I'm going to think, and what most professors would think, is that you went online, you researched Nathaniel Hawthorne, you read through Wikipedia, or you read some other paper, and it was about Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel instead of Young Goodman Brown, and that's what you've included in your essay. I'm going to be very irritated because I'm going to think you didn't even do the reading, and I certainly don't think you went and read a novel if you didn't read the short story. You want to stick to the course content. You want to stick to what you are assigned in the course and the topics you're assigned, and you want to make sure that you are following the specific guidelines and requirements that are listed in the assignment or in the prompt. So stick to the course content. Now, in the case of a research essay, you will probably be pulling your own research articles, academic sources, books, and maybe even source material that could come from, if your professor will allow it, can come from a documentary, or it can come from an interview, but you're researching a topic. Maybe it's a paper that has to do with technology, communication, business communication, and you've pulled some research articles from the database, the school database, and you've read those articles. So those are not assigned readings, but you're staying within the realm of the subject of the course. Now, on that note, when you are doing your research and your reading, please do not read anything for school without taking some kind of notes, making marks. If you have a printed article, for example, you want to highlight some important quotes that stand out to you. If you're reading online, maybe you're doing all of your course reading online. That's okay, but it's always a good idea to either have a Word document open or a Google Doc open, or have just a traditional old notebook and pen handy so that you can write down notes as you're reading. And this is critical. So, I would recommend, if you're watching this lecture, to get information that you need, you should be taking notes watching the lecture. And this is a note I would make: always write down or copy and paste into a Word document 3 quotes, 2 or 3 quotes, maybe up to 5 quotes from whatever it is you're reading, whether it be science, history, political science, psychology, whatever course you're taking, you're going to be reading about the subject. You need to record somewhere, somehow, whether it be on paper or digitally in a Word document or some other method on your computer. You want to capture quotes from what you're reading, because those quotes are what you use in your essays. So when you read something and you don't take notes and you don't record quotes, you don't make a record, you don't annotate. So notes, the word note comes from annotate. If you don't do that as you go, even a textbook, if you're not keeping notes or highlighting or writing something in the margin to point to important parts of the text, you're basically not leaving a roadmap. You're not leaving any kind of breadcrumbs on the trail to go back and discover what it was that you read. You're basically going to go away from what you're reading maybe a day or two later, maybe a week later, and come back and think, oh, I don't remember all the details of this article or this book or this chapter. I'm going to have to go back and reread it and do it again. Work smarter, not harder. So take notes, write down quotes as you go, notes and quotes as you go through your reading material. And that goes for any course. So that's going to be applicable here to your formula because you're going to use those quotes. You're going to use that data, the research information, the examples that you're gathering as you do your reading. You're going to use those in your formula. So let's go on and start at the beginning. Most people have heard that when you get started with an essay, and this is something I think they teach children in elementary school. I definitely remember being taught this, and I remember coming across this concept in school more than once. Oh, you need a hook. You got to start with something great that's going to grab the reader's attention, hook them in. And while this is a great idea for creative writing and for writing in general, that you want to grab the reader's attention, I think for a person that's writing an essay for a college level course, this is probably a lot of pressure. When you open up the blank Word document to get started with your essay, sometimes you don't have a genius idea that comes up right away. Sometimes you don't have something that's a hook. So it can actually give you anxiety and cause you to have writer's block to try to come up with some brilliant first sentence. That's not to say that that doesn't happen. I mean, there are really memorable first lines of many texts and novels, that have great first lines. For example, Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities. The first line is, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." If you think about that philosophically, we can probably apply that to all time periods, but that's a very memorable first line. So if you're writing a novel or something creative, it is a good idea to have a really powerful first line. But we are focusing right now on writing good college essays, academic essays. And you don't really have to have a genius first line. Really, what your hook should be is the title of your essay. That is the first thing that we see as your professor. We open up your document if we're grading online. Most of the time I'm grading everything online nowadays. I don't have paper in my hand anymore. So I open up your document, and the first thing I see is the title of your essay. And I also see whether or not your essay has been put in the correct format. So sometimes your professors will request different types of formats depending on their preference or what they think is the best format for the course material. So an English class might prefer MLA format, the professor might prefer MLA, or it might be that you write all of your papers in APA format. That is pretty much the standard for most academic courses. So the first thing I see when I open the essay is whether or not you put the paper in the correct format and whether or not you have an interesting title. So your title is the hook. And if you don't have the paper correctly formatted, refer back to my advice about getting the requirements that your teacher insists upon correct, doing what the teacher asks, making them happy. Your essays are not necessarily the best place to argue with your professor or try to change their mind about something. That's not to say that you don't have the right to have your own opinion, but if we're really looking at rhetoric and persuasion, you want to persuade your professors to give you a good grade. They're just human beings reading your paper at the end of the day, and you want to try to give them what they want, and what they want is a clever title and things to be formatted correctly. I wouldn't say you have to change your ideas or your beliefs for your teacher's preferences, but you might want to not argue with them or go against something that you know that they're going to be aggravated by when they read your paper, because reading papers is subjective. You know, if I don't like the subject matter or the take on the topic, I can't help but feel, you know, a little persuaded by that. So rhetoric is involved with grades and what you do when you write papers for different types of professors to give them what they want. But use your title as your hook. So it's the first thing we see other than the formatting. And some people like to come up with a genius title, and pretty much the further up in college that you go, the longer you go to college, the more complex your titles can be. So you might have a title that has like a colon in it, you know, something like at the beginning, and then you have a colon and then another piece of the, in fact, you know, I have kind of that going on here. What do you know? The 5 pieces of a 5-paragraph essay. So that's kind of a long title. So you can come up with a brilliant title before you begin writing. Let's go on to the next slide. Oh, we're almost there, so I'll leave it. But you can come up with a title before you begin to write. And then some people prefer to come up with a title after the paper's been written. Sometimes you don't really know where you're going with an essay. Sometimes you don't really know what you think about a topic until you write about it, which again, it's an ongoing process. That's why you don't just write something and then it's finished. You have to go back and add polish and refine and move things around. So you might not really know what your paper is about until you get started. So you just get started. But you might put your title at the end, before, or you put your title at the beginning of the paper, obviously at the top, but you might wait until you've finished writing before you come up with a title. So I often will think of a title before I write my paper, but sometimes I've come up with titles after writing. So speaking of, getting started, you open up your computer, you know you have to do a 10-page essay, for example, or 1,500 words, which is not very many words, but you have something in mind, you know what you have to do. Looking at that blank page can be very intimidating, and it can make you feel overwhelmed, again, anxiety. Rather than trying to think of something genius, just get started. Just start off with some general statements about whatever the topic may be. So if you are writing about World War II, you just maybe start with a few sentences about war in general and the effects of war on, the human experience. Or if you're writing about literature, you might write something general about the story that relates to the story generally. So I like to think of it as a triangle, an upside down triangle. So you have the big side of the triangle on top, and then you go down to the point. It's like a funnel. You start with some general information, like an umbrella of the topic, and then as you move down towards your thesis statement, you get more specific, you get more narrow in your focus. So start with something general, maybe 2 or 3 sentences, just to get the conversation started, just to break the ice on the topic, right? Because writing can be kind of like a conversation, an ongoing conversation between you and the reader, your reader typically being your professor. But your reader, your professor reading your essay, or maybe a peer if you're doing peer review, if you are already finished with the essay and you turn it in, your professor cannot respond to you. So you really cannot directly speak to your professor. So what does that mean? One of the rules, and it's a pretty firm rule, not to say it would never be the case that you would do this, but or that you would not need to, but you never ever use second person in academic writing. What is second person? So I did this or that is first person. When you use I, it's first person. I'm the first person. Second person is you, when you say you. And a lot of people write with that word, you know when this happens and when you are doing this or that. It's kind of a way of processing what you're writing when you're thinking. You comes up in the verbiage, right? Or when you're writing, you say you. You cannot use you in academic writing because you're talking directly to your professor. So for example, if you say, when you are playing a video game, blah, blah, blah. Well, what if your professor never plays video games? It's not applicable to them. So it hurts you rhetorically to speak directly to your reader like that. When you say you, you're speaking to your professor. They might not relate to whatever you are saying about them or about you doing this or that. That's kind of one way of explaining it, but you is informal when you say you. The only time that you need to use you is when you are giving directions. So you need to have a title for your paper. You need to include a thesis in your introduction. I'm giving you instructions. But if I were to say that in an essay format, I would change it to the writer must include a introduction. The writer must have a thesis statement, or students need to include a thesis statement in their essays, and so on. So people, you can say people, or you can say the subject, or you can say pretty much anything other than you. When you change the sentence structure, you have to remove the yous. If you find that you're writing with yous, you need to take the yous out in your revision process. Sometimes I tell students just to go Control Find or Control F in their word processing software. That will bring up a little search box. You can search for the yous and quickly find them and get rid of them. No yous in academic writing, no second person. And I will make that comment on essays when I'm grading them. No second person yous. If it's creative writing, you might use you, but unless you're giving directions, no second person yous. Another thing is writing questions. When people are trying to generate thought about their subject, a lot of times that thought will come out as questions. We do not have a thesis question. We have a thesis statement in our introduction. Questions usually are just the writer's way of getting started and thinking about the subject. So if you find that you write questions in your writing, go back and look at those questions and turn them into statements. So I can see where questions would be beneficial, because if you ask a question as the writer, then typically you try to answer the question as the writer. But questions don't make strong writing, statements do. Especially if you think about it, if you're asking a question, who are you asking the question to? Your professor or whoever's reading the paper. They might have a different answer than what you think they might have. You're not ever sure what's going on in the mind of your reader. So a question can cause a problem if you're trying to make an argument. If you ask a question, you're not sure how that reader is going to respond. You really are not having a dialogue back and forth. The reader is just going to think whatever the reader thinks, and you have no control over that. So, and that reiterates why you can't use the word you and why questions are not a great idea. So provide a background, some context, some information, maybe even a definition, which you would need to cite according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the definition of, and so on. You can include that information. You can include a citation in your introduction. You don't have to, but some people do. But just generally get started. Set up the significance of the topic that you're writing about. Just say some things to get the ball rolling. And I like to use this, it's kind of a gross analogy, but I always tell students, throw up and you'll feel better. Just start. Just get something out. Just start the process, throw up and you'll feel better. When you have that feeling that you're going to be sick, you're sweating, you feel terrible. Right before people get sick, they usually feel terrible. So if you feel that way about writing and you have that, I feel terrible about this, I have so much anxiety, just get something out there and then work with what you've produced. So don't worry so much about getting everything right the first time. Just get it out there. Throw up and you'll feel better. That's some advice about writing. You can write that down. So the mysterious thesis statement. People really don't usually understand what a thesis is when they come to me in their college courses, their first year writing courses. They've been told different things about thesis statements, and we talked about, it should be the first sentence, it should be the last sentence, and all that's kind of not very useful. Really, what your thesis statement is an outline for your paper. It is an outline for your paper. I should be able to read your thesis statement in the introduction of your essay and know exactly every point you're going to cover in the essay in the order the points will be there. So I should be able to look at your introduction and know exactly what your paper is about without question. I should know what is going to be the first subject that you're going to cover, the first topic. I will know what your second point will be, your third point, and so on. So I'll use literature again as an example. If you're writing about literature in a literature course, you're going to be writing about the authors that were assigned in the course, the readings that were assigned in the course. So your thesis is going to cover those authors. Maybe you're going to write about Homer and Virgil and also St. Augustine. Okay, your first three writers of, World Lit 1 course. You must include the authors that you're going to cover in the order that they will appear in the essay in your thesis. Your thesis gives an outline for the paper. Whatever subject you're covering, this goes across the board, science, all of the subjects, all the ologies, history. Thesis statements cover the points of the essay. Not only does it cover the points of the essay, it explains the purpose of the essay, the so what factor. You should be answering the so what factor throughout your entire essay. So what? Why did you provide this quote? Why did you give this example? Why is this data important or relevant? So what? So what? So what? So your thesis covers your points of the essay and also gives an element of the purpose. So by examining these three authors in the order that they will appear, or by examining these aspects of the subject, whatever it may be, one may gain a better understanding of what. That's kind of the formula. By examining, by understanding, looking closer at these ideas, these topic points, we may arrive at a conclusion about whatever. So it's kind of a formula, right? Points A, B, and C will lead us to conclude X, Y, Z, if you think of things kind of in that mathematical formula. So you will be using thesis language. Those are words like examining, understanding, taking a look at, reviewing, a review of this author and this author and this author, or an analysis of this work of art and this work of art, an analysis of these scientific principles, whatever this doesn't just apply to literature, it can be any subject, but you're going to use the language of thesis, which is, words like by understanding, examining, by looking at these topics, we may come to some kind of realization or a conclusion of some sort. You need to explain the so what of your thesis, the so what of your paper. What's the point of the essay? And that needs to appear in every paragraph. There needs to be a so what factor. And if it's not in there, I will often write on my students' papers, so what? Like, why are you including this information? Sometimes people will include a quote from a source, a research or article, or they'll include a quote from a work of literature, and they just leave the quote there. They don't even put anything after the quote. They'll just leave the quote at the end of a paragraph. Never include a quote without commenting on the quote. You must explain why you've included the information. Why did you include the example? Why did you include this detail? Why did you include this quote from this author, or this quote from this research, or this quote from this person you interviewed? Why is this quote significant? Why is the information important? How does it explain one of your points or make a case, an argument that you're trying to make? Explain why you include the information. So just as your introduction is in this upside down triangle, general information, getting more narrow, specific, where your thesis is covering your points, just as it does in the introduction, you will do this also in your main body paragraphs. So your thesis needs to include a so what factor. You also should have transitions between your paragraphs, starting with your introduction. Your professors will like this. They will think that you are connecting your points and that your essay is well organized and that you have flow to your essay if you put transitions in. So if you go back to the upside down triangle, you have general information, specific information, the thesis in your introduction, and then you can transition after your thesis, so it's not just hanging out by itself. You transition to the next point. So every body paragraph thereafter is built on that model. Introduce the topic, include an example, a detail, a quote, provide analysis, and then a transition to the next point, because your points are going to be relevant to one another. They're going to relate to one another. You don't have 3 points that don't go together. You have 3 points that build on each other and that are, related to each other. So your transition is a sentence or two that points you to the next topic. So you present the information in the body paragraph and then you point forward to the next, not only is this point relevant, but also the next point is relevant. You can apply the language of whatever subject you're writing, but again, you're seeing that you have these building blocks. You've got general information about the topic, specific information about the topic, details, examples, quotes, and then you have a transition to your next point. Then you begin your next paragraph, general information about the topic, specific details, quotes, analysis about the details, the examples, the quotes, and then the next transition to the next point, and so on. This is the blocks that you're building throughout the essay. It's kind of the same format over and over. I'll use literature as an example again. Introduce the author that you're writing about, provide a quote from the author, provide analysis for the author's quotes or quote, and then move on, transition to the next author that you're writing about. So transitions help connect the ideas for your reader, gives your essay a sense of flow and organization. And let's just be honest, if you have to write a long paper, putting in transitions will give you some extra length to your paper. Another way to add length is to add more quotes. So if you're ever short on a paper, you don't have enough pages or you don't have enough words, go back and look for more quotes. And if you've been taking notes and writing down quotes, notes and quotes as you go, you'll have a list of quotes that you can use. So that will be easily available to you. So plug in more quotes if you need to add length. Make sure you're adding transitions between your points. And that gives your paper a sense of flow and good organization. Another point about this formula is that if you use it, your papers will be organized, which is what we want. So again, to reiterate, each body paragraph repeats the formula, but rather than having a thesis in every body paragraph, you have your examples and your supporting evidence, your research, your quotes, and your details. Always provide examples and details and quotes in every paragraph and make those connections between points. So the myth is that 5 paragraphs, that's too simple, that we need to be more complex. We need to have more, scholarly ways of putting our essays together. You can still use the 5-paragraph essay to compare and contrast. You can use the 5-paragraph essay to any kind of writing exercise that you need to do. You can use this model, but you turn the 5 paragraphs into 10 paragraphs or 20 paragraphs or 100 pages. So when I went to school for my master's, I had to write a master's thesis. This is different than a thesis statement. It's a long piece of research, a long work. And in my master's thesis, it's book length. It's almost 140 pages. I had an introduction that was about 20 pages. I had 3 sections in the middle, and then I had a conclusion. So I still had the same formula of the beginning, 3 parts in the middle, and a conclusion. But you could have four main points in the middle. You could have 2 main points in the middle, but each of the 2 points has 2 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs for that topic. So you can start mixing and matching this where it's way more involved than 5 paragraphs. It can be 12 paragraphs. It can be 20 paragraphs, but you just break your topics into more paragraphs. You provide more research, or maybe you have subtopics. So if you think of the traditional outline with a Roman numeral 1 that has the topic, and then you have a capital letter A that has this, underneath the heading, and then you have point 1, 2, 3 under A, then you have capital B, point 1, 2, 3. It's the same thing. You can have 2 topics in your body paragraphs, but those go for 4 or 5 paragraphs each, or you can have 4 topics in your main body paragraphs, or you can have 5 topics in your main body paragraphs. But typically, based on my experience, I would usually always have probably 3 main ideas for my papers, maybe 4, or 2 main ideas, and each main idea had some subtopics underneath. And, outlining is a very useful tool. You don't have to do it formally, but when you write down what your points are, what your subpoints are with some examples, maybe even include like page numbers for quotes. If you were to write that all out before you get started, you have an even better, more in-depth roadmap. But also remember, your thesis is your roadmap. So you should know from your introduction with your thesis what your points are going to be and what order they're going to be. If you do find that at the end of the day, when you're finished writing, you have points that don't line up with your thesis, rather than just rewriting the whole paper to match your thesis, you can always go back and revise your thesis statement. Your thesis statement and your introduction must match your paper. So keep flowing between your points. Sit down and write something, get it out, and then go back and try to fix it. Don't edit yourself too much as you go. Get it all out, just start going, keep that flow going, and try to make connections between your points. Try to make connections between the ideas of the different topic points. And if you find that you need a longer paper, you're going to go back and you're going to include more details, include more examples, include more research, add quotes, add block quotes. Those are quotes that are 40 words or more. So they look like a little block in your paper. They're formatted as a block in your paper. They don't have quotation marks around them. The block actually indicates this is a quote. It's a longer quote. I used to love block quotes. It wasn't because I couldn't write enough, because I always end up writing too much. I'm a person that has too much rather than too little, but I always loved using block quotes just because it was like it made me feel like, oh, I'm getting a lot accomplished here. When I put in my long quotes, all of a sudden I'm at 10 pages without even really having to do so much work. But the key is that you have to include your own comments, your own analysis, your own ideas around your quotes. So the general rule of thumb is that your paper should be 60% you, your analysis, and your ideas, and 40% from other sources. But if you ever come up short on an essay, you have 7 pages, but you need 10, see if you can go back and plug in some quotes and introduce your source material. That adds 1 or 2 lines just by simply saying, according to Dr. Mary Wiseman of Johns Hopkins University and her article entitled to such and such that was published in Nature, the journal Nature. I mean, this is a lot of information, but the first time that you introduce your source, the first time you use a source, you can provide the name of the author, the title of the article, where it was published and when. You can include all of that right in your paragraph when you first mention the source, and that not only gives your reader a full understanding of what you're looking at and what you're researching and what quote you're about to put in there and where it came from, but it also provides extra words and more length to your paper. So work smarter, not harder, right? Include introductions to your sources the first time you use them. Give them a good full introduction. And add those quotes. Your professors like to see the quoted material. I will bring up literature as an example again, but if you're writing about literature, you must include quotes from the assigned reading in each body paragraph. If you're writing about Homer, we need a quote from Homer. If you're writing about Virgil, you need a quote from Virgil. If you're writing about Chaucer, you need a quote from Chaucer. You must include quotes, and it doesn't just apply to literature. It applies to any topic that you're researching and reading about. Get those quotes in there. And finally, in conclusion, I will come to a conclusion about conclusions. So most people know, oh, in the conclusion, you just repeat the thesis or you just repeat what you told them in the paper. And that is somewhat true. But if you think about it, it really doesn't make sense to say repeat your thesis statement. If you say in conclusion, and then you write your thesis statement exactly as it appears in the introduction, you might as well just say, in conclusion, please see my introduction. That doesn't really make sense, does it? You wouldn't really want to conclude with just going back to the introduction. So yes, you do restate your points. And there is a saying for writing, tell them what you're going to tell them in your introduction, right? Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them, tell them, tell them. That's your main body paragraphs. And then tell them what you told them, which is true. But we are trying to evolve the academic essay to be more complex. So you're going to need to do more in your conclusion than just restate your introduction or your thesis points. Try to come back to the ideas that you presented. Remember, you generally introduced your topic with some statements that were general. Go back to those early ideas, but look at them differently. Restate them in a way that shows that you have processed and thought about this subject, and the reader has processed what you have thought by reading your essay, and now we can come to a conclusion of some sort. So it's not that you're just concluding your paper as in ending or conclusion as in the end. It's coming to a conclusion, coming to a realization. So present the reader with a perspective that they should have now that they've read your paper, that they've seen your research. Come to a realization. And I say drop the mic. We all know that idiom, oh, he dropped the mic or she dropped the mic on that. So you're coming to an aha moment. a moment of realization. I have dropped the mic on here twice. That's probably a typo, but you really, it can also work because you're really dropping the mic at the end of your paper so that you have your professor read your essay and you end with such a strong remark at the end that your professor is like, wow, they really dropped the mic on this, or they really put it all together, and you feel like a feeling of like, wow, at the end, right? So almost the conclusion to me feels more important than the first lines of the paper, because I've read all of the thoughts that you've had. I see what you've presented as your evidence. I see the quotes that you've included. I see your analysis in each paragraph. And then at the end, you tie it all together with a point of realization, with an aha moment, with a conclusion that comes to a realization. And then as your professor, I'm happy. I feel like, wow, that was a real experience reading this paper. They've really come to a better understanding of the topic. They've led me to a better understanding of the topic. They've provided good examples, good details, good analysis, interesting quotes. They've given me their perspective on things. And now at the end, they've tied it all together in a way that makes me feel like I've had an experience reading the paper. I have come to some kind of understanding or realization. And there's been many times I've read papers by students where, they have brought me to an understanding of something that maybe I didn't think of before, or they've had analysis that I haven't had before, or they have thought about a subject matter in a way that I have not thought about it. So you really can have your professors come to a realization by reading your essays. And believe me, as professors or philosophers, many of us, PhDs that have a love of wisdom, a love of knowledge, we want to have a learning experience when we read your paper. We love to have an experience where you show us something that you've seen in a way that we haven't thought of it before, or we can come to new realizations by looking at your thoughts and your analysis. So I challenge you to go through this process, to get used to the formula. Do I have anything else here? No. Get used to the formula, get used to this process of introducing the topic, drilling down, providing an outline in your thesis statement and the introduction, transitioning between your points, presenting the material that you're looking at, the research, the data, the quotes from the source material that you're looking at, providing your own analysis, always providing comments on your quotes, always providing analysis of the data that you present, always citing the source material where the information comes from, so we know where you're getting your quotes, so we know where you're getting your data, so we know where you're getting your examples. If you do this throughout your essays can be 5 paragraphs, or they can be 5 pages, or they can be 10 paragraphs, or they can be 10 pages, 20 pages. This strategy works regardless of the length of the assignment if you follow that building block formula. So it is a way to take your writing to the next level, and it is, to me, a magic formula. So I hope that you have learned something and that this will help you as you write your academic essays.